Hello, Jan here from Forest Bathing Nature Tonic, and I'm continuing with my obsession with moss. Here it is, isn't it lovely? So I'm going to talk today about how moss gains its nourishment, because when I first read that moss doesn't have roots, I thought, well, that's stupid. Of course it must have roots. How does it feed? How does it get minerals? And the answer is really interesting. I've brought you to this place specifically so that we can see that this moss is growing on a pile of old masonry. It's actually old bricks from World War II. This was an American air base in the Second World War. And this is one of the buildings that's been dismantled, and it's covered, swathed in the most beautiful blankets of this rich green moss, which actually makes it quite beautiful. But there's not much nourishment in a brick, is there? So how are they eating? It's a very cold day. There's an icy wind from the northeast, and there was a snowfall this morning. Most of it's melted now, but I've had such fun following the animal tracks, the badgers and the foxes and the deer. Just behind here I found a form where a deer comes to lie at night, I think. It's a scraped hollow underneath a tree bough that's hanging over. So it's very lovely, but it's very cold, and this is going to be a short video. Moss, how does it live? So it doesn't have roots. It has these fibrous things called rhizoids, and all they are anchors. They're anchoring the moss onto the brick. You see, they're pretty firmly attached here. I'm stroking quite firmly, and there's lots of resistance. There's no way that moss is coming off unless I really got my nails in. So the rhizoids are just holding it down. The roots of plants are actually going into the substrate, whatever they're living in, and they're acting like they're tubes, and they're acting like straws, and the plant is sucking up water with minerals dissolved. But if a moss doesn't have roots, how's it getting its minerals? It's a mystery. We probably all learnt at school how plants make sugars. They take the sunlight, they mix it with water, they breathe in some carbon dioxide, they mix it all together in their green stuff, their chlorophyll, which is a little energy-making factory, and they produce sugars. And then they breathe out oxygen. Luckily for us, because we want to breathe the oxygen. But anyway, so the moss clearly has plenty of chlorophyll. It's a lovely rich green colour. And it's making plenty of sugars. But man cannot live on bread alone. We need other stuff as well. If we just ate boiled rice, we'd get very malnourished. And you can't make a plant out of sugar. You can't just stack up sugar cubes, because as soon as it got wet, it would dissolve. You need minerals to give it body, to be the building blocks, to create some structure. So where do they come from? It's like magic. I was really confused for a while. So I did some more reading around, and I found out that the rhizoids do actually help with the moisture, because they act like a sponge They're not actively sucking it up like a straw, but the fact that they're going down onto the substrate and they're all close together, a bit like if we put a t-shirt in a bowl of water, the water would soak up. By capillary action, it wicks up. So it's an entirely passive process, but the moss is taking some water from down below, and it will be drawing up any minerals that are dissolved in that water. Now, there's probably more minerals on a piece of decaying wood. Look how lovely that is. Isn't that gorgeous? There's more minerals here than there are on a brick. So something else that moss does is, even though it has a very tiny profile, sometimes millimeters, sometimes centimeters thick, it is actually creating some wind resistance, which will cause the wind to slow, which over a large surface will allow the wind to drop any of the sediment that it's carrying. So when there's ploughing in the local fields, the soil will rise up as dust and it gets blown along, and it will come whew, and then it will slow down, sink, and the moss will get some minerals that way. Those sediments will become sediments? Anyway, soily stuff. Will become dissolved in the water, and the moss can absorb it. The moss is absorbing all of its nutrients through its leaves, passively. That's like you and me just lying on our backs going and waiting for food to fall in. It's amazing. So photosynthesis, this process where plants take the sunlight and the carbon dioxide, mix it together with some water and make energy in the form of sugars. Mosses are really good at that. They're master photosynthesizers. We can see this beautiful green here, and at times, to me, it almost looks luminous. Do you see that? Sometimes I'm walking through the woodland and I see this kind of bright, shimmering green. Well, they have some special process where some of the cells are specially adapted to form a kind of a lens, almost like a magnifying glass that's gathering in as much light as possible and shining it onto the chloroplast. That's where it holds the green stuff that does the business. So complex, so clever. And there are some mosses that grow in caves where there is very, very little light. And they actually are kind of phosphorescing. They're glowing. It's called dragon's gold. Can you imagine going into a cave and seeing that? It would be really quite something to see. But these, the green here is producing the sugars extremely efficiently. It can even start photosynthesizing under the snow. I talked last time about how moss survives in the Arctic in extreme conditions. And while it's waiting under the snow, as soon as the snow thins enough for a few rays of light to get through, the moss gets going. It can photosynthesize to temperatures of -15. When most plants have just given up the ghost, it's sat there happily building sugars. It can photosynthesize up to temperatures of 40 degrees. These are centigrade temperatures, 40 degrees. Now, in my greenhouse, if it gets over about 28, I'm opening windows and doors because the plants just, they can't do anything beyond that. They just go, oh, you've got to be joking, this is way too hot. But mosses can. So there's a payoff, obviously. The compromise that moss makes for just passively absorbing any nutrients that come by, which are its building blocks, means that it doesn't have many nutrients, it doesn't have many minerals, and so it remains this pretty humble plant. You know, a few centimeters, that's all it's going to grow. Maximum, some species will grow about 6 inches tall, and they're all propping each other up. But it doesn't have any woody structure, and it's mostly very low growing. So if you're going to grow to be a tree, you need lots of minerals to grow to be a tree. There's a lot of stuff there in a tree. There's not much stuff in moss. And it's also not very nutritious. So there's not many animals that actually eat moss, which is another positive for moss, actually. If you don't want to be eaten, just don't make yourself very yummy or very nourishing. So if you want to eat moss, you're going to have tons of different stomachs, like a muskox, a large herbivore in the Arctic Circle. It has lots of stomachs where it ferments the food and brings it back up and chews it again, and it goes through a very complicated process, and it can manage to eke out enough nourishment from this very unpromising start to make a living. Geese, flocks and flocks of migrant geese come to the Arctic to breed in the summertime, and they graze on the moss. But there are very few creatures that even bother with it. So that's the trade-off. You eat passively whatever comes your way, like a coral or a kind of a sea anemone in the sea. They just wait there and filter the water as it goes past. A barnacle. Once they've chosen where they're going to live, that's it. They're stuck there, and they've just got to wait for the food to come past. It's the same with moss. Very adapted, very clever, and once again, very, very beautiful. So in another video, I'll tell you some more amazing things about moss. See you then. Bye-bye.